The pandemic has been a very difficult time for the arts, especially when their contribution can be crucial for the artists themselves and the rest of us. That's part of the reason for a partnership between the city and Mass College of Art and Design for making $250,000 in grants to artists of color through a program called Radical Imagination for Racial Justice. To tell us about the program are a member of its leadership team and director of the Artward Bound program at MassArt, Chandra Méndez-Ortiz, and one of the grant recipients, Fabiola Méndez. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Chandra, at least the beginnings of this program go back quite a bit before the pandemic. So what got the start of it exactly?
Actually, it started with a really visionary man. His name is F. Javier Torres at the Certain Family Foundation. He used to be here in Boston, has always been committed to racial justice and philanthropy. And so through his leadership as part of the Thriving Cultures program at the Certain Family Foundation, they really started to think about how to really make real change and how to bring folks who are on the ground working within communities to help guide the thinking about what racial justice looks like nationally. So about 2 years ago, a cohort of about 30 leaders from across the country came to New York at the invitation of CERDNA to really just sketch, to kind of think about what does racial justice look like throughout the nation, and having kind of regional conversations about what it could look like in Georgia, Florida, Boston, New York. And through basically a year-long series of conversations, and what was beautiful about this, they didn't have the answer. And none of us had the answer. It was really about having the conversation and staying with the conversation as it evolved and listening to others and the work that has been done and the challenge that people faced. And then it really started to kind of distill down to about 10 folks who were ultimately selected to be a part of this regranting program for the next 3 years, a whole national cohort of folks who really do this work authentically throughout the nation. Were selected to be on this journey. So we've been doing it for about 2 years, and now we're at the place of really launching, because the partnership that we have with the City of Boston and Mass College of Art is one of the only municipality and institutional partnerships within the National Regranting Framework. And we're also the only startup, which means that we're building this from scratch.
Right. Fabiola, this is a program about radical imagination. It is a Latinx creative. When you were studying at Berkeley, that in itself maybe wasn't very radical, but what maybe was radical was focusing on an instrument that I never heard of before, a traditional instrument from Puerto Rico called the cuatro. Why did you go on that trajectory?
So the cuatro is the national instrument of Puerto Rico, as you said, and in my family, we've been very into our traditions, and my parents always made sure that I was proud of my culture and our roots. So playing this instrument for me since I was 6 years old was just a representation of my culture. So everywhere I go, I feel like I have this piece of who I am and where I come from. And through that, I aim to connect with other individuals.
But of course, what you did was not just simply, go down into the tunnel and just sort of surround yourself in the culture, almost like a security blanket. You sort of opened things up and you connected with other cultural influences as you developed as an artist, right?
That is right. And being the only person at Berkeley that played this instrument was very interesting, because no one knew what it was, and being able to educate as well as I was being educated by others was definitely a beautiful experience.
Chandra, this takes me to, I guess, one of the missions of this program. This is not just about embracing this or that culture. This is about thinking of doing things differently in the future.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what the name says. I hope it says that: radical imagination for racial justice. We want to be radical in the way that we think about supporting artists. So in this program, 20% is the floor of what we've asked artists to consider: their well-being, their sanity, what they need to actually thrive as part of their grant application. We've also thought about, not being the folks, behind the scenes with the knowledge, but really utilizing a community-based panel and utilizing youth to be a part of the conversation throughout the structuring of the whole grant process, because this really does need to be in collaboration with people of color, because they have the knowledge, they have just the ideas, the perspectives, and also they're at the center of this work. And oftentimes when you talk about an issue or a problem, someone else is perhaps theorizing solutions and then bringing it to you, and that just doesn't work. So this is really about folks coming together to be radical about rethinking the status quo, really being imaginative about what are the different opportunities, approaches, artist visions, processes that can really inspire all of us to think differently about racial justice across the nation, and in particular Boston. And that's why we're so excited to work with Fabiola and learn from Fabiola, because we really want authentic community collaboration. We want spaces where it's not predetermined what the outcome's gonna be, but you're really open to listening to communities about what they need and how we can use that to actually restructure the way the city works.
Fabiola, doing things differently, that makes me think of your album and the title track, Al otro lado del charco, on the other side of the pond. Talk about the song and the meaning of that title.
My mission as an artist is to connect or experience or reflect on my different identities. And one of those was, moving from my homeland of Puerto Rico to the States, as we call it, crossing the pond. So that whole album was an exploration of just being an immigrant. I mean, and it doesn't necessarily mean being an immigrant from another country, because the Puerto Rico is considered part of the US, but just the fact that you're moving from one place that you call your home and exploring a different space. And that particular song was just reflecting on that experience as I came to Boston with the cuatro, with this Puerto Rican instrument and everything that means for me and for all the Puerto Ricans in Boston.
Chandra, you've got many artists with these grants. They're working in all kinds of media and thinking things in a different way, even with games.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, I think that's the beauty of inviting artists to radically imagine what this could be for them. And so some folks thought about, the field of design and saying there are not enough folks of color who are actually shaping the narrative in terms of video game design. So we have a young artist who's like, we need a different space. We need to create something different. And so that was their proposal, to really think about video game design and artist collectives and how to empower folks to shape this emergent field of practice that so many young people are already digesting and taking it all in. How do you actually create the content? And then we also have other artists who are really thinking about storytelling and food and healing and herbal medicine and creating safe spaces. And there are just so many different ways that artists have imagined what they need and what their communities need. And it's been a beautiful process.
Fabiola, one of the goals of this program is for the artists to take care of themselves and maybe connect with other artists more. How does that fit into your plans?
That, as Chandra said, radical. It is the first grant that I apply for that has made sure that we think about our well-being. I think that oftentimes we just want to focus on the project and work, and not take care of ourselves. And for me, it was like, okay, what does that mean for me? I mean, I don't think about this often. So well-being is definitely taking care of my voice. I haven't done that ever. So a chunk of that money is going to go towards my my health, my physical health, and then just surviving. I mean, paying rent in Boston for artists is a struggle. So definitely a chunk of money will go for that, but mostly it's going to be for my physical health.
Chandra, I was a little surprised, 20% for some kind of self-care, but at the same time, this is not just an emergency Band-Aid.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I think this idea of the labor of folks of color usually, and also artists, being more extractive, that, you're going to do it because you're an artist and this is a great creative thing, or as a person of color, we're asked to do lots of things all the time. And so real fair compensation, real well-being, really kind of thinking about what you need, not only to survive, but to thrive. We wanted to kind of set the table with that in mind, because I think intentions matter. And when you set the intention that your well-being and care matters, that also is the intention moving into the process with the community. And I also think that, you know, the way that this is going to evolve is it's a 1-year journey. There are some grantees that are working from $1,000. There are some grantees that have been awarded $40,000. So for some folks, it may take them a short amount of time to really grab someone's attention, to let them know that there's an issue that they care about, that they want to highlight. For others, they're really trying to get people to rethink their approach to something. And it's going to be a longer journey to bring people into these conversations and also learn from and learn with them. And at every step of the way, we are a learning community as a cohort and as new funders, right? So we're going to be talking about, what does racial justice really look like throughout this whole year, locally and nationally. We're going to be talking about, what is it to really develop authentic community connections, and what does it mean to be radically imaginative? I mean, here we are, a partnership with the city of Boston and MassArt, you know, a municipality and institution, thinking about radical imagination, right? So even in our own practices, we're rethinking everything and really creating in response to the artists and the community as part of this process.
Well, I'd like to thank you both very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That was Fabiola Méndez and Chandra Méndez-Ortiz. We'll have more news in just a moment.